The Imperium is not a place, it is a condition. It is the screaming id of the galaxy, a realm with thought and emotion curdle into reality, where the laws of physics are a forgotten dream. It is a sea of infinite potential and infinite malice, and through its impossible depths, the souls of ships guided by faith and fire try to navigate their Geller fields, creating a fragile bubble of sanity in the madness. On one such ship, the Emperor's benediction, the navigator, third eye open and weeping blood, felt a tremor. It was not the familiar cloying of daemons against the field, nor the turbulent currents of a warp storm. This was different. A puncture, a tear not from the warp into reality, but one that seemed to originate from elsewhere. A place not accounted for in any of the sacred cartographies of the void. On the bridge, Captain Vorlich felt it too, a psychic pressure drop that made the lumen lights flicker. "Report!" His voice was a gravelly thing, worn down by decades of command in the segmentum obscurus. "Anomaly, Lord Captain," a junior officer stammered, his face pale as he stared at the auger screens. "No mass, no energy signature, it's just a void." And then it was gone. The pressure vanished. The navigator gasped, his third eye snapping shut. The tear had sealed itself, but it had left something behind. A piece of foreign reality, now adrift in the cold, unforgiving void of the Armageddon system. Alucard opened his eyes. Or he assumed he did. Sensation was a strange and distant thing. The last thing he remembered was a particularly tedious argument with Integra, a mountain of paperwork, and then a pull, a sensation of being untethered, like a balloon whose string had been cut. Now there was only silence, a deep, profound silence that was somehow louder than any sound he had ever heard. He was tumbling, his long crimson coat flapping in a non-existent breeze. Below him, a world of rust and green and fire spun slowly. It was ugly. I liked it immediately. It had character. To his left, a massive angular space station shaped like a human skull stared sightlessly into the void. He burst out laughing, the sound a physical impossibility in the vacuum. "Oh, I get it. I died and went to the most heavy metal album cover ever conceived, and they didn't even invite me to the photo shoot. Rude." He began to fall, the thin exosphere starting to grip his coat. The friction should have incinerated him, turning him into a brief, pretty shooting star. Instead, he felt a pleasant warmth, like stepping into a sauna after a long night of murder. He spread his arms, embracing the fire. "Whee! Now this is a commute. Take that, London traffic." As he plummeted, his enhanced perception caught a flicker of movement. Two vessels were engaged in a deadly dance. One was a blocky, utilitarian ship adorned with eagles and skulls, the very picture of fascist chic. The other was a nightmare of spikes, fleshy protrusions, and runes that seemed to bleed light into the void. A Chaos Raider. It was turning its macro-cannon batteries towards the Imperial vessel, a predator moving in for the kill. Alucard's grin widened until it threatened to split his face. "Ooh, a welcoming committee, and they brought the good china." He didn't alter his trajectory. He simply raised his jackal pistols, the silver-plated 544 Casal hand cannons gleaming in the starlight. He aimed not at the hull, but at the glowing energy coil of a macro-cannon as it began to charge with baleful light. "Let's play a game," he whispered, his voice a promise of violence. "It's called What Happens When an Unstoppable Bullet Meets a Very, Very Stoppable Object." Spoiler alert, it gets fucked. He fired. The sound was a glorious paradox, a thunderous, percussive roar that had no right to exist in the airless void. The 2 rounds, simple slugs of lead and intent, crossed the distance. They struck the charging energy coil at the exact moment it reached critical mass. The resulting explosion was a thing of beauty, a chain reaction of ruptured plasma conduits and secondary detonations tore the Chaos Raider open from the inside. It vomited its demonic crew and their corrupted souls into the uncaring void in a spectacular bloom of fire and shrapnel. The fireball illuminated Alucard's grinning, sun-glassed face as he fell through its outer edge, a crimson angel of deliverance or annihilation. On the bridge of the Emperor's benediction, Captain Vorlich stared at the auger screens, his jaw tight. Report, what in the Emperor's holy name was that? A new pattern of torpedo? No, my Lord Captain, a trembling tech priest chirped, his macadodendrites twitching in confusion. Scans indicate a single non-augmented humanoid life form, biomass consistent with Homo sapiens. He appears to have shot the heretic ship with ballistic firearms while re-entering the atmosphere. Vorlich's face was a stony mask. This was sorcery, Xenos trickery, something designed to confuse and demoralize. Track him, he commanded, his voice cold as the void. I want that thing found and purged before it hits the surface. Nothing that defies the Emperor's reality so brazenly can be allowed to live. But Alucard was already gone, a crimson streak piercing the thick, polluted cloud cover over Armageddon's most blighted continent, leaving behind a trail of confusion, wreckage, and a single burning question in the minds of those who witnessed his descent. What new, unaccountable variable had just been introduced into their eternal war? Alucard landed, not with a cataclysmic crash that reshaped the geography, but with a gentle, almost polite tap of his boots on the permacrete. The impact site was a shallow, perfectly boot-shaped crater, as if he had simply stepped off a curb with a bit too much enthusiasm. He found himself in a canyon of despair, a narrow alleyway squeezed between 2 Hive City spires that clawed at a sky the color of a day-old bruise. The air was a thick, physical presence, a choking cocktail of promethium, ozone, rust, unwashed humanity, and the underlying sweet, rotten stench of industrial waste. It was, he decided, absolutely delightful. Ah, the ambiance, he announced to the dripping pipes and stained walls. It smells like failure and desperation. It's like a little piece of home, but with worse fashion sense. He began to walk, his coat swirling around him like a pool of blood against the grimy monochrome gray of the underhive. The citizens of this sector, a wretched mass of hive scum, indentured workers, and shuffling mutant beggars with too many eyes or twitching limbs, scurried out of his way. It wasn't his imposing presence or the guns. It was an instinctual, animal fear that bypassed the conscious mind and went straight to the lizard brain. They sensed the apex predator in their midst, a shark that had just swum into a pond of terrified guppies. He passed a giant stained mural of a skeletal, armored man, his gaze stern and demanding. A preacher, his robes as filthy as the street, was screaming from a rusted iron pulpit, his voice amplified by a crackling voxcaster. "The God Emperor of mankind, He protects. He is our shield against the darkness that seeks to devour our souls. Only in unwavering faith will you find salvation from the terrors of the void." Alucard stopped, tilting his head like a curious bird of prey. A god who needs to constantly remind everyone he's a god? Sounds a little insecure, don't you think? I mean, take me. I know what I am. Do I go around shouting, "I am the Crimson Fucker" from the rooftops? Well, sometimes, but only on Tuesdays and when the mood strikes. It's about branding, you see. A gang of hive gangers, their faces a mosaic of scars and crude metal implants, their weapons a collection of rusted autoguns and sharpened rebar, slunk out from a side passage blocking the end of the alley. They were the local bullies, the self-proclaimed kings of this microscopic, squalid food chain. Their leader, a hulking brute with a hydraulic claw for one hand, sneered, revealing a mouthful of metal teeth. "Hey, Redcoat, nice glasses. Hand them over. And the coat. Looks expensive. And whatever else you got. Make it quick." Alucard's grin widened until it seemed to split his face, a terrifying maw of white in the gloom. "Oh, little puppies, you think you're predators. You think this," he gestured languidly to the squalor and decay surrounding them, "is the abyss. You are standing at the kiddie pool, splashing your feet. You have no idea how deep the rabbit hole goes." He didn't even raise his pistols. The shadows around him, already deep and cloying in the hive's perpetual twilight, began to deepen further. They coalesced, stretching and twisting against the laws of physics and light. From the darkness at his feet, shapes emerged, pulling themselves into being. Hulking bipedal forms with glistening pale skin and massive distended jaws. Dobermans. But they were wrong, terribly wrong. Their eyes glowed with a hellish, intelligent crimson light, and their muscular forms flickered with barely restrained power, as if they were barely contained in this dimension. "Who's a good boy?" Alucard cooed, his voice a sickening parody of affection. "Go on, fetch me their souls." The hellhounds launched themselves forward with a silence that was more terrifying than any snarl. The gangers didn't even have time to scream. The alley was filled with a wet, percussive symphony of rending flesh, the crunch of bone, and the metallic screech of the leader's hydraulic claw being torn from its housing. It was over in 3 heartbeats. The shadows receded, the hounds vanished back into the nothingness from whence they came, and Alucard stepped over the few remaining unrecognizable pieces, not a single drop of blood on his polished boots. "See," he said to the empty alley, as if lecturing a particularly slow student, "that's a real monster. No speeches, no posturing, just efficient, artistic violence. It's about the economy of motion. You should take notes."
He continued his walk, a casual sightseer in the city of damnation, eventually finding his path blocked by a large fortified gate leading into the deeper, more dangerous underhive. A squad of Imperial guardsmen, the Armageddon Steel Legion, identifiable by their full-face gas masks and heavy greatcoats, were holding the line, their lasguns trained on a seething, screeching horde of things. They were pale, scuttling creatures, their forms a chaotic jumble of too many limbs, blinking eyes and chittering mouths, pouring from a ruptured sewage pipe that vomited filth into the street. Mutants. The dregs of the underhive, their humanity twisted by generations of pollution and latent warp taint. The sergeant, his voice gruff through his helmet's voxcaster, saw Alucard approaching with an unhurried stride. "Civilian, get back! This area is quarantined by order of the commissariat. Fall back or be shot!" Alucard ignored him completely, walking straight toward the tide of mutants as if he were heading to a particularly interesting bakery. "Sorry, boys, but I'm on a tour. The See the Sights of Absolute Shit package. And this," he gestured to the onrushing horde, "looks like the main attraction. Don't worry, I have a ticket." "The man is mad!" one of the young guardsmen yelled, his voice cracking with panic. The mutants, sensing new unafraid meat, surged toward him, their chittering rising to a pitch fever. Alucard laughed, a deep, echoing, and genuinely joyful sound that cut through their mindless noise. "Ah, look at them all, so eager to die. It's adorable. It's like a puppy parade if the puppies were highly deformed and wanted to eat my face." He didn't just shoot them. He performed a ballet of death. He moved with impossible fluid speed, a red blur amidst the sea of pallid, twitching bodies. His pistols roared, each shot a thunderclap that punched a fist-sized hole through multiple creatures, the hydrostatic shock turning their insides to pulp. He ripped limbs from sockets with his bare hands, crushed skulls under his heels with casual flicks of his ankle, and sometimes just stood still, letting them swarm over him, their claws and teeth doing nothing more than shredding his coat, which reformed an instant later, good as new. "Is that all?" he taunted, grabbing a two-headed mutant by both necks and smashing their heads together into a pulpy mess. "I've had more challenging bowel movements. Put your backs into it. I believe in you." The guardsmen could only watch, their lasguns lowered, in a mixture of sheer, uncomprehending horror and a strange, blasphemous awe. This wasn't combat. It wasn't war. It was pest control, on a biblical, soul-scarring scale. When the last mutant lay twitching in a mountain of its own kind, Alucard stood pristine at the epicenter, not a speck of gore on his pale skin or his sunglasses. He adjusted his cravat and looked back at the stunned soldiers. "So," he said, his voice cheerful once more, "which way to the real party? I'm looking for something with a little more pizzazz. Maybe some spiky boys. You know, the ones with the goat legs and the bad attitudes. Tentacles. I'm not picky. I just require a certain level of existential threat to maintain my interest." The sergeant, his hand trembling on the stock of his lasgun, could only point a shaky finger deeper into the toxic darkness of the underhive, towards the rumored locations of the more dedicated chaos cult activity. Alucard tipped an imaginary hat. "Much obliged. Try not to die of boredom without me. It's a dreadful way to go." He vanished into the deeper darkness, leaving the guardsmen surrounded by a mountain of corpses, the smell of ozone and blood thick in the air, left to wonder if they had just been saved by a man, or if they had merely been privileged to witness one ancient, unimaginable devil fighting another lesser one.
The deeper Alucard went, the more the hive changed. The oppressive industrial grime of the upper underhive gave way to something older, more profound. The air grew thick with the scent of ozone, and Promethium was replaced by the cloying smell of incense, burnt flesh, and something else, a psychic static that prickled against his preternatural senses. It was the smell of desperation, of minds fractured and offered to things that swam in the spaces between stars. It was the scent of true, dedicated chaos. He followed it like a bloodhound, a connoisseur following the bouquet of a fine wine. He found their lair in a vast subterranean chamber that had once been a primary manufactorium. The skeletal remains of assembly lines, once dedicated to forging the instruments of imperial war, were now draped with human skin and adorned with profane eight-pointed stars that seemed to writhe and bleed faint light. The cavernous space was lit by flickering braziers that cast long dancing shadows, making the blasphemous murals on the walls seem to move. Hundreds of robed figures knelt in a wide circle, their hoods drawn low, their voices raised in a guttural, discordant chant. The language was not meant for human vocal cords. It was a physical thing, a vibration that made the metal grates underfoot hum in sympathy. In the center of the circle, a sorcerer presided. His body was a testament to the gifts of the dark gods. One arm was a twisted chitinous claw, one eye wept a viscous black fluid, and his face was hidden by a horned helmet fashioned from a human skull. This was Karzan, dark apostle of the cult of the twisted rune. Before him, the very air was tearing, a pulsating, warp-born rift. A vertical wound in reality shimmered with impossible colors. Energy, raw and malicious, crackled from it, and the air grew thick with the promise of manifest horror. "Bingo!" Alucard whispered, leaning against a broken conveyor belt as if watching a particularly avant-garde stage play. He crossed his arms, a critic awaiting the main act. "Let's see what's on the menu tonight. Please don't be another boring bloodletter. I had my fill of mindless rage with the orcs." Karzan raised his mutated arms, his voice rising to a fevered pitch. "O Father of excess, Lord of pleasure and pain, we offer you these souls, these vessels of sensation. We offer you our pain, our ecstasy, our very humanity. Send us your herald, tear a hole in this veil of false reality, and let your glory flood this realm." The rift flared, burning with a sickly pink and purple light. Something began to push its way through. It was a creature of unsettling contrasts. It had a perfectly androgynous, beautiful human face, its features so sublime they were painful to look upon, yet it was locked in a silent scream of either agony or ecstasy. Below the neck, its body was a mass of writhing pink tentacles, glistening crab-like claws, and lashing prehensile tongues. A demonette of Slanesh. The cultists prostrated themselves, weeping and laughing, their minds overwhelmed with ecstatic terror. The demonette fixed its mesmerizing, pupilless eyes on Karzan. Its voice was a symphony of seduction and razor blades. "Myrtle, you have called, I have come. The song of your souls is sweet. I shall compose a masterpiece of agony with them." Alucard pushed himself off the conveyor belt, his boots echoing in the sudden expectant silence. "Ahem. Sorry to interrupt the, whatever this is, a cosmic orgy, a really bad poetry slam. But I'm going to have to ask you to put that thing back where it came from, or so help me, I will be very cross." Every head in the chamber turned. The demonette's beautiful face contorted into a snarl of pure, undiluted hatred. The spell of its presence was broken. an interloper, a static note in my song. Your soul will be a fine appetizer before the main course. I will make you feel sensations you cannot possibly imagine." It lunged, moving with a blinding, fluid speed that defied its bizarre anatomy. Its claws extended to rip his heart out and show it to him while he still lived. Alucard didn't move. He didn't even flinch. The razor-sharp claws, capable of shearing through ceramite, struck his chest and snapped. The sound was like brittle bone breaking. The demonette stared at the stumps of its primary claws, its expression one of genuine, universe-shattering disbelief. Alucard looked down at his unmarked vestcoat. "Oh dear, did you break a nail? That's so embarrassing for you. Here, let me help you with your existential crisis." His form dissolved. He didn't turn into bats or mist. He became a torrent of pure, absolute darkness, a living void that swarmed over the demonette. This was not an attack, it was an erasure. The creature shrieked, a sound of true, primal fear now, not the manufactured terror it inflicted on others. It struggled, its tentacles and claws flailing against the consuming nothingness, but it was like trying to fight the tide. The shadows pulled it apart, on a molecular level, absorbing its essence, its memories, its very place in the great game of the warp. There was a final, wet, popping sound, like a bubble of reality bursting, and the demonette was gone, completely. The warp rift flickered, sputtered, and died with a pathetic whimper. The shadowy torrent flowed back, reforming into Alucard, who patted his stomach. Tastes like purple, and regret, and a hint of cheap perfume. 2 stars, would not recommend. Kazan stared, his chaotic faith, the very foundation of his being, shattered into a million pieces. The power he had devoted his life to, the entity he had sacrificed 1,000 souls to summon, had been unmade like a bad thought. What are you?" he stammered, his voice a broken thing. Alucard walked slowly towards him, the cultists scrambling away from his path like cockroaches from a light. "I'm the check and the balance. I'm the party guest who drinks all the booze, breaks the furniture, sets the host on fire, and then complains about the lack of hors d'oeuvres." He stopped in front of the trembling sorcerer. "You were praying to a god of excess, of sensation? Oh, you sweet summer child, you have no idea what true, absolute, soul-crushing boredom feels like. That is my domain. And compared to the majestic, infinite void of my ennui, your little god is a cheap street drug peddled by a desperate man in a dirty coat. I will show you. I will give you a taste of my world." He didn't flood the sorcerer's mind with pain or horror. He flooded it with the sheer, infinite, mind-breaking monotony of his own centuries of existence. The endless, identical nights, the predictable, squealing prey, the lack of a single worthy challenge, the slow, grinding realization that everything was just a variation on a theme, and the theme was tedium. His mind didn't break with a scream of agony, but with a whimper of absolute apathy. He collapsed into a catatonic heap, drooling, his eyes vacant, every desire, every ambition, every sensation utterly extinguished. He was, in a way, finally at peace. Alucard looked at the cowering, mind-broken cultists. The show's over. The main act was a flop.
Go home, or don't. Join a book club. Take up knitting. I really don't care." He turned and walked away, leaving a scene of broken faith, a consumed demon, and a profound new kind of terror. He had come for a challenge, and so far, all he had found were amateurs playing with forces they couldn't comprehend. But the scent was getting stronger, the psychic static intensifying. The big players, the true powers of this insane universe were nearby. He could feel their weight in the world, their massive, chaotic presence pressing down on the fabric of this reality. And he was finally starting to feel intrigued.
The Underhive was a memory. A layer of filth and despair peeled back to reveal the raw, bleeding flesh of Armageddon. Alucard emerged from a rust-caked ventilation shaft into the ash wastes, a vast, radioactive desert scarred by centuries of total war. The sky was a perpetual, sickly orange, choked with the smoke of 10,000 burning pyres. The ground was a cracked and blistered wasteland of fused glass and the skeletal remains of war machines. This was where the real fight for the soul of this blighted rock was happening. And the psychic thunder of it was a siren's call to Alucard. It was pure, unadulterated violence, stripped of ritual or reason. It was a raw green wave of aggression that beat against his senses like a physical drum. He followed it, a smile playing on his lips for the first time since his arrival. This wasn't the intricate, scheming evil of chaos. This was honest, straightforward, and gloriously stupid. He crested a ridge of blackened rock and looked down upon the valley below. It was a tableau of apocalyptic war. A green tide was crashing against a fortified Imperial defense line. It was a symphony of crude, overwhelming power. Daka jets, held together by rust, prayer, and the sheer belief of their orc pilots, screamed overhead, dropping explosives that bloomed into filthy brown mushrooms of smoke and shrapnel. Battle wagons, looking like scrap heaps given terrifying motive force, rumbled forward, their deaf roaners grinding the earth to dust. And thousands upon thousands of orc boys charged, a seething, roaring mass of muscle, teeth, and crude weaponry, their guttural war cry a single, world-shaking word that echoed across the wastes. Wah! The Imperial line was a bastion of grim determination. Lehman Russ tanks, their hulls scarred and painted with devotional slogans, fired shell after shell into the advancing horde. Ranks of guardsmen from the Armageddon Steel Legion, their faces hidden behind gas masks, stood shoulder to shoulder, unleashing volleys of lasfire that created a shimmering red haze in the air. But the orcs just kept coming. Their collective psychic field, the Wa, bent reality just enough to keep them going, making their ramshackle weapons work and their tough hides even tougher. It was a force of nature, an avalanche of green that seemed utterly unstoppable. "Now this is more like it," Alucard bellowed, his voice cutting through the din of artillery and roaring engines. No chanting, no creepy vibes, no philosophical bullshit. Just good, honest, wholesale slaughter. I love it. He strode directly into the no-man's land between the two armies, a single spot of crimson in a world of gray, green, and rust. For a moment, both sides paused, the sheer absurdity of a lone man in a long coat walking calmly into a storm of bullets and explosions caused a hiccup in the battle's rhythm. An orc knob, a hulking brute twice Alucard's size, with a boss pole adorned with the skulls of Imperial guardsmen, spotted him. "What's this? Are you me come for a fight? This is my patch, Redcoat. I'll crump you good." The knob charged, its massive power claw, a whirring, hydraulic-driven fist of scrap metal, sparking with energy. It was a blow that could crush a battle tank's armor. Alucard didn't draw his guns. He stood, waiting, a look of profound boredom on his face. The claw swung down, meant to crush him into a red smear on the ash. Alucard caught it. His hand, seeming small and frail, stopped the whirring multi-ton weapon dead. The orc stared, its tiny piggy brain struggling to process this fundamental violation of its understanding of the universe. "My turn," his voice said flat. With a casual twist of his wrist, he ripped the power claw, and the entire arm it was attached to, clean off the orc's body with a sound of tearing metal and flesh. Before the knob could even scream, Alucard reversed his grip and drove the claw's blade straight through the orc's chest, impaling it on its own weapon. He let the body slump to the ground, and then threw his head back and roared to the heavens, a declaration to the entire battlefield, to the planet, to the galaxy itself. "I'm a fucking vampire!" Then he released his restraints.
It began with the shadows. The weak, long shadows cast by the burning wrecks and the jagged rock formations began to stretch and writhe, pulling free from their sources. They flowed towards Alucard, a tide of absolute blackness. The air grew cold, the roar of battle seeming to dampen, replaced by a spectral howling wind that came from nowhere. His form flickered, and from the darkness around him poured his legions, the souls he had consumed over centuries. Not just the Dobermans, but ghouls with elongated claws, phantom soldiers from a dozen different wars in antiquated uniforms, shambling corpses and things with too many eyes and mouths, all of them howling with a singular, focused hatred. It was a crimson and black army, born of a single monstrous will, a physical manifestation of the hell that lived inside him. The Orc Wawa field, a psychic manifestation of their collective belief in their own strength and invincibility, met Alucard's own personal, curated hell. And for the first time on Armageddon, the Wawa field faltered. The green glow that empowered the orcs flickered. The orcs, creatures who lived for a good fight, saw a fight that was no longer good. It was terrifying. It was unnatural. Alucard's legions didn't fight fair. They didn't make noise. They didn't feel pain. They just consumed. They dragged orcs screaming into the shadows, which dissolved them into nothingness. They were an ocean of anti-life, washing over the green tide. Alucard himself was now a whirlwind of destruction. He moved through the orc ranks not like a warrior, but like a force of physics, a walking singularity of violence. His fists punched through orc armor. His teeth tore out throats. His very presence seemed to unravel them. He was laughing, a full-bodied, insane cackle that was louder than the explosions, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy that was more terrifying than any war cry. The war boss, a giant orc in clanking mega armor, saw his boys being slaughtered and roared in challenge, his own Wawa energy flaring. "Use a biggin, a right proper fight. I'll get your skull for me trophy." The war boss fired his massive rotary shooter, the shells large enough to vaporize a Space Marine. Alucard stood and took the full barrage. His coat was shredded, his body riddled with holes the size of fists. He looked down at the massive gaping wounds, seeing daylight through his torso. And then he looked up at the war boss, and the wounds closed in an instant, the flesh knitting itself back together as if it had never been harmed. "Tickles," he said. The war boss's eyes went wide, with a confusion that bordered on metaphysical crisis. "What? How'd you do that? That's cheating."
"Magic," Alucard replied, and then he was simply in front of the war boss, having crossed the distance in the space between heartbeats. He didn't punch him. He simply placed his hand on the war boss's forehead. "You believe you're the biggest and the strongest. Your whole race believes it. It's adorable. But belief is a fragile thing." He focused his will, a consciousness so ancient and powerful it dwarfed the gestalt psychic power of the orcs. He pushed back against the Wa'a field itself, imposing his own reality upon it, broadcasting a single, simple message directly into the war boss's mind, and by extension, the minds of every orc on the field. "You are weak. You are prey. I am the hunter. I am the end of things." The war boss, for the first time in its violent, bloody life, felt fear, a primal, soul-deep terror that had nothing to do with physical threat and everything to do with the utter negation of its existence. The Wa'a field, built on unshakable confidence and aggression, shattered like glass. The orc army, feeling their leader's terror and the sudden chilling absence of their psychic power, broke. They turned and ran, a disorganized, panicked mob, their fight gone out of them, replaced by a terror they could not comprehend. The Imperial defenders watched, stunned into a silence that was more profound than any battle noise. The unstoppable orc advance had been not just stopped, but annihilated, routed by a single being and the army of nightmares he commanded from the depths of his own soul. As the shadows receded and the spectral army vanished back inside him, Alucard stood alone on a mountain of green corpses. He adjusted his sunglasses, which had remained perfectly perched on his nose throughout the entire ordeal. He took a deep, theatrical breath of the toxic air. He felt mildly entertained for about 5 minutes. He looked towards the horizon, where the air shimmered with a different, more intelligent kind of corruption, a deeper, more ancient evil. The true servants of the archenemy, the forces of chaos undivided. "Okay," he said to himself, a wide predatory grin spreading across his face. "Warm-up's over. Time for the main event." The battle against the orcs had not gone unnoticed. In the highest, most secure spires of Hive Primus, in a chamber sealed against sound, sight, and psychic intrusion, 3 figures observed the aftermath through a complex array of pict feeds, astropathic transcripts, and battlefield Ozpex data. The air was thick with the smell of ozone, sanctified incense, and cold, hard fear. They were the Ordo Xenos, the Emperor's watchdogs against the alien, and the thing in the red coat had just become their primary, all-consuming concern. Inquisitor Valerius of the Ordo Xenos, a severe woman whose face was a roadmap of grim determination and whose right eye had been replaced by a multispectral augmetic, pointed a cybernetic finger at a frozen, grainy image of Alucard standing atop a mountain of orc corpses, his sunglasses reflecting the fires of a burning battle wagon. "This is not a Xenos," she stated, her voice clipped and precise. "Its morphology is baseline human. Its actions, however, are unprecedented. It operates on a principle I cannot quantify." Interrogator Kalen, her protégé, a younger woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, studied the data slate in her hands, its screen glowing with damning information. "It single-handedly broke a WOG field, Inquisitor. That is not a feat of arms. That is a feat of will. A psychic potential unlike any recorded. And yet our psychers report a complete null reading from its location. It is a void in the warp." The third figure was a Death Watch Space Marine, Brother Sergeant Cassian of the Imperial Fists. His black power armor was a tapestry of kill markers and devotional seals, a testament to 100 Xenos purges. His voice was a low, grating rumble, like stones grinding together. It is a threat. It displays abilities consistent with demonic possession, pariah gene manifestation, or Xenos warp entity mimicry. The unknown is the enemy. It must be purged immediately. Valeria steepled her fingers, her augmetic eye whirring softly as it focused on Cassian. The question, Brother Sergeant, is not if it is a threat, but the nature of that threat and how to neutralize it. It consumed a demonette of Slanesh in the Underhive, completely, leaving no trace in the Imperium. It routed an orc army of significant size, not by killing them, but by shattering their fundamental worldview. Lasfire, plasma, macro cannon shells. Our reports from the fleet engagement indicate it simply regenerated from total physical dispersal. It is, for all intents and purposes, unkillable by any conventional means at our disposal. Nothing is unkillable, Cassian stated flatly, his hand resting on the hilt of his power sword. The Emperor's grace and a sufficient application of force will prevail. The Emperor's grace may need to provide a much bigger gun, Kaelin muttered, almost to herself, earning a sharp, disapproving look from the Inquisitor. We have a more pressing and immediate issue, Valeria said, her voice dropping as she brought up a new set of images on the central hololith. These were blurry, taken from long-range augers, but they showed figures in spiked, Hydra-adorned power armor moving through the ash wastes with a predatory, unnerving grace. The Alpha Legion. The most cunning and treacherous of the traitor legions. They are converging on his location. They see what we see, a weapon, an unaccountable variable of immense power. They will try to turn it, to corrupt it, to use it for their own ends. The consequences of the Alpha Legion wielding such a tool are too dire to contemplate. Cassian slammed a powered fist on the adamantium table, leaving a dent. We cannot allow that. We must deploy the kill team. We will engage the Alpha Legion and eliminate the target in the confusion. A headshot from a Vindicare assassin, a melta charge at point-blank range. There is always a way. A bold and straightforward plan, Brother Sergeant, Valeria said, her tone cool and analytical. But what if we are wrong? What if this entity is not of the warp? What if it is something else entirely? A force of nature, an asset that could be pointed at the true enemies of mankind?
To consort with such a thing is heresy, Cassian growled, the air around him growing cold. It is an abomination. It violates the natural order. The path of the righteous is clear. To survive in this galaxy sometimes requires heretical thoughts, Brother Sergeant, Valerius countered, her gaze unwavering. Our sacred duty, the mission of the Ordo Xenos, is to protect the Imperium from the alien. This thing, whatever it is, just destroyed a significant Xenos threat that has been grinding down our armies for months. It has also, according to these Underhive reports, actively consumed a creature of the warp. I am not ready to declare it an enemy until I understand its nature and its potential. To destroy a weapon without knowing if it can be aimed is the height of folly. A tense silence filled the room, a schism as old as the Inquisition itself laid bare, the Puritan who would purge the unknown at any cost, and the radical who would risk damnation to use any tool to ensure survival. Very well, Valerius said, her voice leaving no room for further argument. She had made her decision. We will proceed with a two-pronged approach. Brother Sergeant Cassian, you will take your Death Watch kill team and move to intercept the Alpha Legion cell. Your orders are to engage and eliminate the heretics. Prevent them from making contact with the target at all costs. You are authorized to use extreme force. Cassian stood, his armor whirring, his presence filling the room. It will be done, Inquisitor. He paused at the door, turning his helmeted head back towards her. This is a mistake, Valerius. You are dancing with a daemon. You will burn for it, and you may take this entire world with you. Perhaps, Valerius said, her eyes now fixed once more on the image of the grinning, sunglassed monster. But if it is a daemon, then it is a daemon that eats other daemons. And in this galaxy, that might just be the closest thing to a miracle we have ever seen. As the Death Watch Marine stalked from the room to prepare for war, the heavy door ceiling shut behind him, Valerius and Kalen were left alone in the humming silence. The weight of their decision pressed down on them. Interrogator, Valerius said, her voice soft. Prepare my personal lander. We are going into the ash wastes. Kalen's eyes widened. Inquisitor, to do what? To have a conversation, Valerius replied, a dangerous glint in her biological eye. We are about to walk into the lion's den, armed with nothing but our wits, our authority, and a desperate, perhaps foolish hope that the most terrifying creature we have ever encountered might, just might, be pointed in the right direction.
The ash wastes were a symphony of desolation. The wind howled a constant mournful dirge, whipping stinging particles of radioactive dust against rock and metal. It was in this blasted landscape that the Alpha Legionaries found him, or perhaps allowed themselves to be found. They emerged from the shimmering heat haze, not with a declaration of war, but with the silent, predatory grace of sharks closing on a scent. One moment, Alucard was alone, a crimson spot against the gray. The next, he was surrounded by 5 figures in Hydra-emblazoned power armor, their forms blurring as their optical camouflage deactivated. Their leader, a warrior who would answer only to the name Alfarius, stepped forward. His voice was a distorted, sibilant hiss from his helmet's vox grill. An interesting performance against the greenskins. You possess unique talents, wasted in this conflict. Alucard looked them over, his head tilted, a faint smirk on his lips. He was, as ever, profoundly unimpressed. More spiky boys. You guys are like the herpes of the universe. You just keep popping up at the most inconvenient times. What do you want? An autograph? A signed confession? Because I confess I'm really bored of this conversation already. Alfarius ignored the taunts, his posture of calm assessment. Your power is an anomaly. The Imperium is a rotting corpse, propped up by lies and the worship of a dead man. It fears what it cannot control, what it cannot understand. It will seek to destroy you. Join us. The gods of chaos offer true power, freedom from the shackles of this false reality. Alucard let out a short, sharp bark of laughter. Freedom? You serve literal gods. You think you're free? You're a slave with a fancy paint job and a subscription to Spiky Bits monthly. I serve no one. I am no one's dog. Well, except for one little girl, but that's a long story, and she's not here, and trust me, you're not her type. The ruinous powers can give you anything you desire. Wealth beyond measure, worlds to rule, an endless supply of victims upon which to sate your appetites. You still don't get it, do you? Alucard's grin vanished.
replaced by a look of profound, ancient weariness that seemed to deepen the lines on his face. I have had victims. I have had worlds, in a way. I have lived for centuries. I have walked through oceans of blood so deep I could barely see the moon. And you know what I found at the bottom of it all? Nothing. A great big gaping void of meh. Your little gods are just bigger fish in a very small, very stagnant pond. He took a step forward, and the Alpha Legionaries, despite their superhuman conditioning, instinctively tightened their grip on their bolters. You talk about these gods of yours, this Khorne who offers endless rage. I have known rage. It gets tedious after the first few millennia. This Tsichin, with his endless convoluted schemes. I have plotted for longer than your rotting empire has existed. It gives me a headache. Nurgle? Despair? I bathe in it. It's my morning coffee. Slanesh? Sensation? I have felt everything there is to feel, twice over, and then I got bored and felt them all again backwards. Your gods are one-trick ponies. They are facets of a broken mirror. I am the darkness the mirror reflects. Alfarius was silent for a long moment, the only sound the whine of servo joints and the moaning wind. The offer had been made and rejected. The calculus of the situation had shifted. Then you leave us no choice. If you will not serve chaos, you will serve as a warning to others who would defy its destiny. The Alpha Legionaries opened fire as one. Bolter rounds, mass reactive shells designed to pierce armor and explode inside the target, filled the air with thunder and the smell of cordite. Alucard didn't try to dodge. He spread his arms wide and let them hit him. His body was torn apart, shredded by the high explosive shells. His crimson coat was vaporized in places, his limbs blown off, his torso riddled with cavernous wounds. His head, sunglasses still perfectly, absurdly intact, rolled to a stop at Alfarius's feet. "Is that it?" The head mumbled, its lips moving. "I've had more stimulating exfoliations."
Then the shadows at the feet of the Alpha Legionaries began to move, not the natural shadows of the rocks, but a deeper, colder darkness that flowed like liquid. It swarmed over the pieces of Alucard's body, pulling his form back together in an instant that defied perception. He stood whole again, brushing a non-existent speck of dust from his now pristine lapel. "Ha ha ha! My turn," he said, and the temperature plummeted. The battle was not a fight, it was a dissection. The Alpha Legionaries were post-human warriors, veterans of 10,000 years of clandestine war, their skills honed to a razor's edge. But Alucard was something else entirely. He moved through their attacks like a ghost, his hands and teeth tearing through ceramite armor as if it were wet parchment. He moved with a casual, almost lazy grace that made their superhuman speed seem sluggish. He ripped a legionary's helmet off and stared into his eyes. The Space Marine didn't just see death. He saw the infinite, yawning void of Alucard's existence, the countless souls screaming within him, the absolute certainty of oblivion. He screamed, a raw, unfiltered sound of psychic terror, before Alucard crushed his skull with a casual grip. Another legionary fired his plasma gun, the superheated blast washing over Alucard. When the glare faded, Alucard was standing there, licking his lips. Tingly. He then vanished and reappeared behind the warrior, severing his head from his shoulders with a single sharpened fingernail. One by one they fell, not just killed, but unmade. Their souls, their chaotic essences, their memories and secrets were consumed, pulled into the legion within him, adding their strength to his own, their knowledge to his library of the damned.
Alfarius was the last. He fought with a feral, desperate skill. His warpsmith-forged power blade, a weapon humming with chaotic energy, scoring a hit across Alucard's chest. A wound that glowed with malevolent purple light and for a moment refused to heal. "Ha ha!" Alfarius snarled, a note of triumph in his distorted voice. "A true weapon, blessed by the gods. It can hurt you. It can kill you." Alucard looked down at the sizzling, warp-tainted cut. Hurt. That's not hurt. That's flavor. A little paprika in the stew. He grabbed the glowing blade with his bare hand, the chaotic energies crackling and spitting against his pale skin, and snapped it with a sound like a breaking glacier. Before Alfarius could react, Alucard drove the broken, sparking shard through the legionary's chestplate, pinning him to the hard-baked ground. He leaned down, his red lenses inches from the legionary's helmet. "Tell your gods something for me," Alucard whispered, his voice now devoid of all mockery, cold and absolute as the void between stars. "Tell them their little game is boring. Tell them a real monster has come to town." And he's not impressed. He placed his hand on Alfarius's chestplate, and the Alpha Legionary dissolved not into blood and bone, but into streams of light and information which were sucked into his palm. He absorbed the knowledge, the secrets, the sprawling 10,000-year plot of the Alpha Legion, the lies within lies. He saw it all, and he found it derivative, predictable. As the last of the Chaos Space Marines was erased from existence, Alucard sensed new arrivals. He turned, not with surprise, but with a sense of weary expectation, to see a squad of black-armored Space Marines taking up positions on a nearby ridge, their heavy weapons trained on him. And behind them, two figures in the distinctive robes of the Inquisition. "Oh, good!" Alucard boomed, spreading his arms wide in a theatrical gesture of welcome. "Tell me, do you have any better offers than your spiky friends? Because so far, the benefits package in this universe is severely lacking."
The air and the ash wastes crackled with a tension thicker than the radioactive dust hanging in it. The Deathwatch kill team, their black armor a stark funerary promise against the grey landscape, had their weapons locked on the single crimson-clad figure. Heavy bolters, melter guns, and stalker-pattern rifles, each one capable of ending a lesser threat permanently, were aimed at Alucard's center mass. Brother Sergeant Cassian's finger rested on the trigger of his own weapon, his entire being a coiled spring of righteous fury, waiting for the slightest provocation, the faintest excuse to unleash the Emperor's judgment. Inquisitive Valerius stepped forward, her hand raised in a clear, sharp gesture for her forces to hold. She was pale, but impossibly composed, her cybernetic eye whirring softly as it performed 1,000 different scans on the being before her, all of them returning as nonsensical garbage data or terrifying null readings. "I am Inquisitor Valerius of the Ordo Xenos," she announced, her voice cutting through the wind with practiced authority. "You will identify yourself." Alucard tilted his head, the picture of amused curiosity. "Ordo Xenos? So you're the alien experts, the other police. Tell me, O esteemed expert, after all this," he gestured with a flourish to the scattered, dissolving remains of the Alpha Legionaries, "what am I?" "That is what we are here to determine," Valerius replied, her voice steady, betraying none of the primal fear screaming in the back of her mind. "You are not of the warp. Your essence is different. It is ancient. It is hungry. But it is not chaotic. It is a singularity. See? You're smarter than the spiky boys. I like you. You can live." His head swiveled, the red lenses fixing on Cassian. "Him I'm not so sure about. He has that whole
righteous fury thing going on. It's so basic, unimaginative, the palette of a child who only knows the color red. "You will show respect, creature." Cassian's voice boomed from his helmet's voxcaster, amplified to a deafening level. "You stand in the presence of an Imperial Inquisitor." "Or what? You'll shoot me? Been there, done that, got the t-shirt, and then I ate the t-shirt because I was peckish. Your threats are as empty as your God Emperor's eye sockets." He turned his attention back to Valerius, the manic energy subsiding as quickly as it had flared. "So you're not here to kill me? Good. That's boring. You're here to recruit me. Let me save you the breathy, dramatic speech. The answer is no. I don't join clubs. They have dues and meetings, and the other members are always so needy, and the dress code is atrocious." "We are not offering membership," Interrogator Kalen spoke up, her voice trembling only slightly. She clutched a data slate like a holy ward. "We are offering direction." Alucard's grin returned, a flash of white in the gloom. "Ooh, direction. Now we're talking. Point me at something you want dead. I don't care who or what it is. I don't care about your politics, your dogma, your pathetic little squabbles. I just need the violence, the beautiful, chaotic symphony of screaming and destruction. Is that so much to ask?" Valerius saw the opening, a sliver of a chance in this impossibly dangerous dialogue. This being was not a servant of chaos. It was not a Xenos in any conventional sense. It was a force of nature, a predator of such absolute magnitude that it viewed greater Daemons and Space Marines with the same casual disregard. And like any predator, it could be guided, it could be pointed towards the correct prey. "There is a world," she said carefully, choosing each word as if it were a live grenade, "a Daemon world deep in the Eye of Terror. It is a fortress monastery of the Word-Bearers Legion. They are attempting a grand ritual, a confluence of sacrifice and faith to tear a permanent hole in reality. They seek to pull a piece of the immaterial into the material universe, to create a new, stable Daemon world that would serve as an eternal beachhead for the archenemy. The suffering it would cause, the scale of the slaughter, is incalculable."
Alucard's manic energy seemed to focus, to sharpen. The grin remained, but it was different now. Less mocking, more interested. A demon world, a permanent party in the heart of madness, a legion of fanatical, spiky sorcerers trying to break the universe for their ungrateful gods. He took a step closer, ignoring the chorus of targeting lasers that now danced across his chest. "Now you have my attention." "The Imperial Navy cannot get close. The system is too well defended, the warp currents too treacherous. Our armies would be corrupted or driven insane before they made planetfall. But a single entity, a being that can consume demons, that is immune to their influence, that can operate where armies cannot." "You want me to be your can opener," Alucard finished for her, his voice a low purr. "You want to point the unstoppable monster at your most powerful enemies and hope he likes the taste of them more than he likes the taste of you? You're playing a very dangerous game, Inquisitor." "Survival in the 41st Millennium is a dangerous game," Valerius countered, meeting his gaze through the red lenses. "We play with the tools we are given, no matter how unorthodox." Alucard was silent for a long moment, a true rarity for him. He was thinking. A real challenge. A world of demons, a legion of the most zealous Chaos Space Marines, a ritual that could fundamentally break the local laws of physics.
It was the most interesting proposition he had heard since he'd been unceremoniously dumped into this god-forsaken galaxy. "I'll do it," he said finally. "Not for you, not for your corpse emperor on his shiny toilet, but for me. I'm bored, and this sounds fun." Cassian took a heavy step forward, the ground cracking under his armored boot. "Inquisitor, you cannot be serious. To unleash this thing into the Eye of Terror, the consequences are unforeseeable. It could become a greater threat than the one it is meant to destroy." "The consequences of doing nothing are already written in the blood of 1,000,000 worlds, Brother Sergeant," Valerius retorted, her composure finally cracking with the strain. She looked back at Alucard. "We can provide you with a ship, the coordinates, navigation data." Alucard waved a dismissive hand. "Don't need it. I ate one of the spiky boys, the one called Alfarius. Or maybe it was Omegan. Who can keep track? I know the way. Their knowledge is my knowledge. Their secrets are my snacks." He began to turn away, his coat swirling, then paused. He looked back over his shoulder, his red lenses fixed on Valerius with an intensity that felt like a physical weight. "But know this, Inquisitor," he said, and his voice was quiet, devoid of all theatrics, which made it infinitely more terrifying. "If this little adventure doesn't live up to the hype, if I get there and it's just more of the same tedious shrieking and flailing, if I get bored again, I'm coming back, and I'm going to be very, very hungry. And I'll start my feast with you and everyone you've ever known." It was not a threat. It was a simple, factual statement of cause and effect. A predator stating its terms. And with that, his body dissolved, not into bats or shadows this time, but into a swirling vortex of crimson particles and darkness, howling like a legion of the damned before collapsing in on itself and vanishing from reality, leaving the Inquisition and the Death Watch alone in the suddenly silent wastes. They stood there for a long time, the only sound the mournful wind. Cassian finally lowered his weapon. "We have damned ourselves, Inquisitor. For a temporary reprieve, we have unleashed a horror upon the cosmos that may eclipse even the primordial annihilator." Valerius did not look away from the empty space where the monster had stood. "Or, Brother Sergeant," she whispered, "we have just unleashed the one thing in this galaxy that the forces of hell should truly fear."
Real space did not so much tear as it simply gave up. There was no ship, no Geller field, no psychic protection. Alucard simply willed himself through the veil, his form a concentrated point of anti-chaos punching into the heart of madness itself. The transition was not a journey, but an instantaneous, violent translation from one state of being to another. One moment, the ash wastes of Armageddon, the next, the Eye of Terror. It was not a place, it was an idea given form, the idea that physics had resigned in disgust and gone home for a good long cry. Stars were blasphemies against the concept of light, burning with impossible colors and screaming in languages that had not been spoken since the birth of galaxies. Planets wept blood into the void, their surfaces a shifting mosaic of living flesh and screaming architecture. The fabric of time itself was a tangled, frayed knot of past, present, and future, all happening at once and screaming at each other. For a human, even a heavily augmented one, it would have been an instant, irrevocable descent into gibbering, soul-shattered insanity. For Alucard,
It was a theme park. "Wow!" he bellowed, his voice somehow carrying in the airless, logicless expanse. "They really went all out on the interior decorating. It's so aggressively tacky. I love it!" He flew, not through space, but through a nebula of congealed sorrow, the psychic residue of 1,000,000,000 lost souls brushing against his consciousness like cobwebs. He bathed in the light of a star that was a giant weeping eye, finding the sensation invigorating. He passed a world where the mountains were made of fused, screaming skulls, and the oceans were liquid despair, and he considered stopping for a picnic before deciding the ambiance was a bit too downbeat. He was not unnoticed. The denizens of the warp, the things that swam in this sea of raw emotion, sensed an intruder. He was a cold spot, a static hiss in their vibrant symphony of excess and decay. He was a null event in a realm of everything events, and they hated him for it. Demons of all descriptions swarmed him, drawn to the dissonance of his presence. Flamers of change, their legs a chaotic tangle of bending joints, vomited warp fire that was the crystallized essence of change and mutation. The multicolored flames washed over him, and he held out his hands as if warming them by a campfire. "Ooh, pretty colors!" The fire slid off his shadowy form, unable to find purchase, unable to change what was fundamentally, immutably, Alucard. Bloodletters of corn, their brass armor glowing with infernal light, charged with hell blades held high. Their rage was a physical force. Their blades, capable of shearing through the hull of a titan, shattered against his skin as if striking a diamond mountain. He picked one up by its horn, looked into its burning eyes, and said, "You need to work on your anger management, Cupcake," before casually tossing it into the path of a drifting, semi-sentient comet made of solidified envy. Plague-bearers of Nurgle, their bloated bodies dripping with joyful pestilence, stumbled towards him, chanting their endless tally of diseases. Their mere presence would rot a man to sludge in seconds. Alucard took a deep, theatrical breath. "Ah, the smell of Grandpa's attic!" The virulent miasma had no effect. The flies that buzzed around them landed on him, twitched, and died. He was, for all their gifts of despair and entropy, an unassailable fortress of absolute, immutable self. He was a shark in a pond of piranhas. The piranhas were numerous, vicious, and born of nightmare, but the shark was simply on another taxonomic level entirely. "Sorry, kids, but the all-you-can-eat buffet is closed," he cackled, as a squadron of Tzeentch screamers, their bodies like manta rays of living crystal, dove towards him. He opened his mouth, and a vortex of darkness swallowed them whole, their psychic screeches cut off abruptly. "Unless I'm eating you, then it's open. My mistake."
He followed the psychic scent he had consumed from the Alpha Legionary, a trail of zealous corruption and ritualistic intent that cut through the chaos like a ley line of pure, focused evil. It led him to his destination, the demon world of Sicarius. It was a planet-sized cathedral to the dark gods. There was no natural geography left, only architecture. Spires of black bone, fused with still-living, screaming human faces, pierced a sky the color of a fresh, gangrenous bruise. The ground was not soil or rock, but a paved mosaic of the living, twitching bodies of the faithful, their mouths open in silent, eternal praise. Rivers of blood and molten brass flowed through streets lined with flayed skins stretched like banners. The air thrummed with a single, overpowering chant, the name of Lorgar and the dark gods repeated by billions of throats in perfect, horrifying unison. And at the planet's heart, in a plaza larger than most hive cities, the ritual was underway.
100,000 word-bearers, dark apostles, their armor etched with pages from the Book of Lorgar, stood in concentric circles, their voices raised in a hymn that was tearing at the last, fraying threads of reality. Their combined psychic power was focusing on a single point, a nexus of such immense warp energy that it hurt to look upon, even for Alucard. At the center of this blasphemous congregation, a figure of immense power was forming, pulling itself from the roiling energies of the rift. A demon world. Not just any demon world, but a bloodthirster of Khorne, an exalted one, summoned to be the anchor, the linchpin for the new, permanent demon world. Its name was Kabanda. Its wings, when fully formed, would blot out the insane sky. Its axe was a mountain of black iron, still wet with the blood of worlds from its last manifestation. Its rage was a nuclear fire, and it was being given a permanent home in reality. Alucard landed on the living pavement with a soft tap that was somehow audible over the world-shaking chant. The chanting faltered. 100,000 helmeted heads turned towards him. The air, already thick enough with warp stuff to drown a sun, grew heavy with a new, alien kind of menace. A word-bearer's dark apostle, his armor a tapestry of writhing script, stepped forward. An interloper, here, in our most sacred moment. You are too late. The ritual is complete. The anchor is formed. The great Kabanda walks among us. The bloodthirster, Kabanda, fully manifested. It was a mountain of corded muscle and brass armor, 30 feet of pure distilled fury. It roared, and the sound alone vaporized a dozen word-bearers who were standing too close, their armor and bodies turning to dust. It fixed its burning coals for eyes on the tiny, crimson-clad figure. A soul has come to beg for annihilation. Its voice was the sound of continents breaking. Alucard looked up at the colossal engine of destruction. He adjusted his sunglasses. Finally, he said, his voice a low purr of anticipation that cut through the demon's roar. Something my size.
Kabanda charged. The ground, paved with the living bodies of the faithful, did not just crack, it screamed. Each footfall was a localized earthquake, pulverizing the twitching mosaic into a paste of gore and shattered bone. The demon's wings' vast, leathery membranes beat once, not for lift, but for momentum, sending a hurricane-force wind that flattened lesser word-bearers and tore the flayed skin banners from their poles. It swung its axe, the Hell Reaver, a blow honed on the anvils of the warp, a strike that had decapitated Imperial titans and carved battle fleets in two. It was not an attack. It was a fundamental statement of erasure, a declaration that anything in its path simply ceased to be. Alucard didn't dodge. He met the charge head-on. He raised his arm, a pale, seemingly frail limb against the mountain of demonic flesh and black iron. The axe slammed into it. The impact did not create a sound. It created a silence, a perfect spherical void of absolute quiet that swallowed all noise for a mile, followed by a shock wave that did not push air, but reality itself. The concentric circles of chanting word-bearers were thrown back like leaves in a storm, their sacred hymn cut off into a chorus of clattering armor and startled grunts. The Hellreaver stopped. It did not cut. It did not even scratch. The edge of the universe-ending weapon rested against Alucard's forearm, impotent.
Kabanda's rage-filled eyes, burning like forge fires, widened in a confusion so profound it bordered on a theological crisis. "What are you?" The demand was a psychic blast that would have turned a Space Marine's brain to slurry. "I'm the party crasher," Alucard said, and then he shoved. The force of the push sent the colossal bloodthirster stumbling backwards, its hooves digging deep furrows in the screaming ground. It was an impossibility, a physical, metaphysical, and narrative impossibility. The word-bearers who were regaining their feet stared in utter disbelief. Their faith, their certainty in the absolute power of their dark gods, wavered for the first time in millennia. This was not a being fighting a demon. It was a man bending the rules of the universe to his will, and the rules were breaking. Enraged beyond even its own colossal capacity for wrath, Kabandha unleashed its hellfire breath, a torrent of warp fire that was the essence of pure, undiluted hatred given form. It was a river of incandescent rage that could melt adamantium, burn souls, and scar the fabric of the Imperium. Alucard stood in the center of the inferno, letting it wash over him, as he basked in it as if it were a summer shower. "Ooh, a warm welcome," he bellowed over the roar of the flames. "I feel so loved. Are you trying to seduce me? It might be working." The fire died down, having exhausted the very concept of heat in its vicinity. Alucard was untouched. He took a deep, exaggerated breath. "Ah, smells like failure." This was no longer a battle. It was a systematic, humiliating deconstruction. Alucard was not just fighting the bloodthirster, he was dismantling its every reason for existence. Its strength was meaningless, its rage was impotent. Its very nature as an apex predator of the warp was being called into question by something that treated it like a mildly interesting insect. Alucard moved. He was a blur of crimson and darkness, a phantom of impossible physics. He appeared on Kabandha's shoulder, driving his fist not just through the demon's brass armor, but through the conceptual idea of its armor. He vanished and reappeared at its leg, his teeth tearing out a chunk of demonic flesh that sizzled and screamed as he swallowed it. He was a parasite, a virus, attacking not to kill, but to degrade, to prove a point. "You are nothing," Kabandha roared, its voice cracking with frustration so immense it was creating new, minor demons of pure vexation in the air around it. A gnat, a speck, a static hiss in the anthem of annihilation.
"A speck that's kicking your ass," Alucard laughed, appearing directly in front of its face. He ripped the bloodthirster's own barbed whip from its belt and began lashing it across its monstrous visage. "Bad, Daemon, no biscuit. Does Khorne know you're wasting this much rage on one little man? He must be so disappointed." The word-bearers, their faith shattered into a million pieces, tried to intervene. They fired their bolters, unleashing volleys of cursed rounds. They chanted, summoning lesser daemons and hurling bolts of raw sorcery. But Alucard's shadow legions erupted from him once more, a tide of his personal damnation that engaged the Chaos Space Marines and their summoned allies in a whirlwind of spectral violence. The ritual site descended from sacred ceremony into absolute, meaningless pandemonium. Kabandha, driven to a frenzy beyond comprehension, focused all its power, all its identity as the scourge of worlds into a single, reality-ending blow. It raised the Hellreaver high, gathering not just its own strength, but drawing power from the ritual, from the faith of the word-bearers, from the very essence of the eye of terror around them. The axe glowed with the light of a dying star, its edge humming with the frequency of absolute finality. "Die, die and be forgotten," it screamed, and brought the axe down in a blow meant to unmake Alucard's very soul print from existence. Alucard finally drew his jackals. He didn't aim at the axe. He didn't aim at the body. He aimed at the space between Kabandha's eyes, at the core of its demonic essence, the story of its being written in warp stuff. "The only thing that dies today," Alucard said, his voice suddenly calm, cold and absolute, a sliver of absolute zero in the heart of a supernova, "is my boredom." He fired both guns. The 2.454 Kasul rounds, insignificant specks of lead in the grand scheme of the warp, flew true. But they were not just bullets. They were concepts. They were the embodiment of negation. They were the absolute, final no to Kabandha's existence. They were the end of the story. The rounds struck. There was no explosion, no sound, no flash of light. The massive bloodthirster simply unraveled. Its form frayed at the edges like old parchment in a fire, dissolving into motes of light and static that were then sucked violently towards Alucard. He opened his mouth, and the entire essence of the exalted greater daemon, its rage, its history, its place in the great game was pulled into him, a vortex of screaming energy that lasted for a full minute, a demonic soul of incalculable power being devoured. When it was over, Alucard stood alone. The word-bearers were being mopped up by his legions. The ritual was broken, the rift snapping shut with a sound like a universe sighing in relief. The demon world of Sicarius began to tremble, its unnatural stability lost with the death of its anchor. Alucard patted his stomach. Tastes like chicken, rage-filled cosmic chicken. He had done it. He had single-handedly stopped a demonic incursion of apocalyptic proportions. He had consumed one of the most powerful entities in the warp. And as the last of the word-bearers fell, he felt the same. He was still bored.
"What will you do?" Kaelin asked, her voice filled with a strange, pitying horror. Alucard was silent for a long time. The sounds of the distant battle seemed to fade away, the universe holding its breath. "I'm going to take a nap," he said finally, his voice soft, almost gentle. "A long one. Maybe for a century or two. Maybe forever. This universe of yours, it's just not for me. It's too loud, and yet not loud enough. It screams, but it has nothing to say." He looked at Valerius one last time, a final ghost of a smile on his lips. "Don't worry, Inquisitor. I'm not going to eat you. You're not even a snack. You're all just background noise." And with that, his body dissolved, not into bats or shadows or crimson mist this time. He simply turned off. His form became transparent, then faded, like a forgotten memory, vanishing from reality without a ripple, without a sound. He didn't go to another planet. He didn't return to the warp. He retreated into the one place left for him, the only territory that was truly his, the infinite, lonely, and silent landscape of his own soul. The Inquisition and the Death Watch were left standing in the sudden, crushing silence. They had witnessed the impossible. They had been saved from an apocalyptic threat by a monster of incomprehensible power, and they had been left with a chilling, final understanding. The most terrifying thing in the entire war-torn, demon-infested galaxy was not the power to destroy worlds. It was not the hatred of gods or the hunger of Xenos. It was the profound cosmic ennui of a being for whom all of creation, with all its passion, its horror, its faith, and its fury, had become boring. The war for Armageddon would continue. The Imperium would endure for a time. But they would never forget the day the Crimson Fucker came to town, found its ultimate horrors lacking, and left, leaving behind a silence more deafening than any war cry, and the lesson in the true meaning of fear.
He returned to Armageddon. He didn't know why. It was as good a place as any, and marginally less irritating than the collapsing demon world he'd left behind. He appeared back in the ash wastes, near the same Imperial lines he had defended, or rather, near where he had incidentally slaughtered the enemies of the Imperium while pursuing his own amusement. The war against the orcs was still raging, a perpetual grinding conflict, but the tide had turned. The Imperial Guard, emboldened and mystified by his earlier unintentional assistance, was pushing the disorganized greenskins back with a renewed, if confused, fervor. Inquisitor Valerius and her retinue were waiting for him. They had received the astropathic screams from the Eye of Terror, the sudden, violent cessation of the ritual on Sicarius, the catastrophic and complete disappearance of Kabanda's immense psychic signature from the Great Game. They had felt the tremor in the warp, a shockwave of demonic confusion and terror that had rippled across the galaxy. They looked at Alucard not with gratitude, but with a new, profound, and soul-deep kind of terror. The kind of fear that comes not from the threat of death, but from the understanding of something so far beyond your comprehension that it renders your entire existence meaningless. You succeeded," Valerius said, her voice barely a whisper, stripped of all its former authority. "Yeah, it was a thing. The big red guy put up a bit of a fight. More than the orcs, anyway. He had flair. I'll give him a 6 out of 10. Alucard shoved his hands in his pockets, the picture of nonchalance. "So, what's next? Got any other apocalypses you need cancelled? A C-10 shard lying around? A Tyranid hive fleet looking for a bad time? I'm not busy." Brother Sergeant Cassian stepped forward. He did not raise his weapon. He knew its utter futility now. He simply stood, a monument of imperial defiance in the face of the absurd. "You are a greater threat than any of those things. You are an unclassifiable anomaly. You operate outside the Emperor's light, outside the logic of this reality. You cannot be controlled, you cannot be predicted. You are, therefore, the ultimate enemy." "Control? Prediction?" Alucard laughed, but it was hollow, empty, devoid of any real mirth. "It's not about control. It's about purpose. I thought this universe, with all its endless war and its screaming gods and its cosmic horrors, might finally have one for me. A challenge, a meaning, a reason to try. But it doesn't. It's just more of the same. Bigger monsters, louder guns, more elaborate rituals, but the song remains the same. It's a chorus of the damned singing the same note for 10,000 years. And I'm so very tired of it." For the first time, the Imperials saw past the monster. They saw past the power, the arrogance, the theatrical violence. They saw the being within. Not a demon, not a Xenos, but perhaps infinitely worse. An immortal, all-powerful consciousness, a universe of contained suffering and power, trapped in the exquisite hell of its own endless, meaningless existence. He wasn't seeking to rule the galaxy or devour the sun. He was seeking a reason not to unmake it all out of sheer, universe-spanning apathy.